Good morning, everyone. How are you all? Hope you're all okay. Hope you're having a good week. I've had a busy week so far. I had a funeral yesterday. It was my friend's mother-in-law, so it was probably one of the most personal ones I've done so far. But it was beautiful. It was nice to see a lot of people there, as many as we could have. I didn't know the lady, but the daughter-in-law I've known for decades, bless her. But it was very sad all the same. But yeah, it was beautiful, and it was a beautiful day for it. So yeah, so that's what I've been up to. And then I had work yesterday afternoon, which is at the shelter as well. So that was good. And so today I was hoping to have my friend Jane come and talk to us, and Jane's a funeral director. Now, unfortunately, poor old Jane really hasn't been very well. So I picked her brain, so I've put this together. So any bits that are wrong are entirely me, not Jane. I'll make that clear. So today I'm going to talk to you about what happens when somebody dies. You know, what is it that you need to do? How do you need to go about it? You know, and what happens next, because we've talked about palliative care, we've talked about making your wishes known, we've talked about all of that, but it's actually really nice as well to think about what happens when it does happen. And you know, if you've not experienced it before, it is, you know, there is a bit of a minefield of what you've got to do. And of course, you're not in the right space of mind necessarily to be doing it. And if you've not done it before, I mean, there are lots and lots of checklists. I'm going to put some up later in the week. People like, or groups like Marie Curie, Macmillan, Dying Matters, all have wonderful lists of what to do when somebody dies. There's, I mean, we're in Kent, so there is a wonderful checklist on the Kent's page that tells you what to do. But just to run through it so you've got an idea of what to expect, because I mean, if you've got somebody who's done it before, they've got an idea. But if it's out of the blue and if there's nobody to tell you, it's going to be difficult at a time when you feel least strong. So some of the main questions I'm going to try to cover today are: what is it that you have to do? What are the legal requirements? Who do you have to inform? It's not going to be a complete list by any stretch of the imagination. There's going to be bits that we haven't covered. So in normal circumstances, bearing in mind that at the moment we're in far from normal circumstances, I completely get that. So normally when there's not a COVID situation, and COVID has made a bit of a difference this year, as I'm sure we're all aware. So if somebody passes away in hospital, 2 doctors are required to certify that they are dead and to agree on the cause of death. They then complete a medical certificate of cause of death, and that will also also include the cremation papers. This isn't the death certificate you get when you go to the registrar, or that will come later on. But this is the one that states the cause of death, and it can take a little while for that to be complete, because obviously if you're going to have 2 doctors to sign, they're busy people, they've got lots of people to see, and you know, so that can take a little while. You might not get that on the day. I know when my great uncle died, my parents had to go back a couple of days later to pick that up from the hospital. There's a special little office, was Medway Hospital. There was a little office at the side that they went to pick this up. And yeah, this is the medical certificate of cause of death, not the death certificate. But obviously at the moment we're in COVID pandemic, so because of that situation, if the deaths occurred in hospital, at the moment just 1 doctor needs to sign the medical paperwork if the person is going to be buried. However, if the person is going to be cremated, it'll still need 2 doctors to sign. Now, that's obviously a bit macabre, the reason why, but it stands to reason. It's because if there's an issue later on, somebody who's been buried can be exhumed. But once you cremate somebody, that's final and you can't recheck. So supposing there was a suspicion later on that, you know, somebody said, well, oh yeah, I murdered the wife, or there was a concern around a doctor's treatment, or that they furthered their death, earlied their death on, hurried it on a bit. In the case of like Harold Shipman, I'm sure you all remember him, and I think he's one of the reasons that this legislation came in. But obviously if somebody has been cremated, you can't recheck. So then once that's done in the hospital, the person goes to the mortuary. And for example, these usually aren't just called the mortuary in front of people. They've usually got a nicer name, you know, like Willow Lodge or something like that. So we've got Mrs. Jones is off to Willow Lodge is kind of a code for Mrs. Jones is going to the mortuary, but that's nicer than shouting that through the ward. So once your loved one's gone off to Willow Lodge, Rose Cottage, you know, Jasmine Porch, whatever, then the patient liaison officer will liaise with the family. It's their job. So they will phone, contact you. You might have been there, morning Carmel, or you can, Carmel, you can join in with this one, because I know you were with your lovely mum, weren't you? And that's for you, because I know this was your first Mother's Day without lovely Ellen, and I know that must have been really, really tough on you. But please join in if you feel you can. So we're talking currently about if people are in hospital when they die. So you've got a patient liaison officer who that's their job, is to liaise with the family, and once the family have maybe said goodbye, sent the person off to the mortuary, the patient liaison officer will then contact the undertaker of your choice. So say you want Brown Brothers to deal with mum or auntie or whoever. They'll then send a little private ambulance along and come and collect that person and take them on their last journey to the undertakers. Now, that's if it's at hospital. If death occurs at home, and that's slightly different. So often people are at home, and I know Carmel won't mind me saying that her lovely mum was at home. So if I've got any of this wrong, Carmel, please, or if it's different, I mean, that was in a different county, so it might be slightly different, though I think this is pretty much across the board. It's slightly different. So you would call the doctor, and they will try and get somebody out to you as soon as they can. And I've been in the doctor's surgery when the appointments have been delayed by an hour because Dr. Mason I was waiting to see, he's a lovely, lovely man, has had to go out. He's got to go on an urgent home visit, and you know, you're sitting there, it's frustrating, but somebody somewhere has breathed their last breath, so you know that's what's happening. So the doctor will come out, and usually if you're dealing with palliative care, you know that somebody's in their last weeks or months, or somebody's been taken ill. So they'll come out and they'll sign. And again, at the moment, just one doctor is required to sign for that right now, at that moment in time. Obviously, if you find somebody, you go to a friend's house, you can't get in, or you go in, you let yourself in, and you find that unfortunately you think they're dead. Obviously, you call the ambulance. Now, if you know they're dead, and obviously it is suspicious circumstances, then you call the police. You'd call both. In fact, both would attend. The police and the ambulance would attend. And the ambulance, when they get that they certify that person is dead, they will call the police. They won't take that person away if they're passed when they get there. If the person gets into the ambulance and then they die on their way to hospital, that person will, and they're pronounced dead on the journey, then they'll go to the hospital mortuary. But if they're not in the ambulance, they won't take them. And that can be really difficult to deal with. But that's the way it is. There has to be a cut-off point, and that's what it is. So obviously, if there's been suspicious circumstances, the coroners will be contacted. and the police will do that, but they'll attend if the ambulance advise them, and the coroners will be contacted. So if the person's been ill, like I said, and the doctor knows, they might be certified at home by the doctor. And once that's done, the undertaker can arrange to come and take your loved one. Now, again, if the doctor can come and do it there, and somebody needs to come and, you know, as long as somebody medical has pronounced that person has passed, that's fine. Now the doctor can then attend, another doctor can then attend at the undertaker's for your second doctor certificate, because the reason they do that is to make sure that they're in agreement about what the person died from. Because if Dr. Jones says, oh yes, they had a heart attack, and, you know, Dr. Smith says, well, hang on a minute, what's all this bruising here? They look like they've been hit. We need to look at this. And even if there's bumps and bruises, even older ones, they may say, well, actually, they've had a trauma. They might not have died from it, but could it be a clot? So that's sometimes why they'll disagree about cause of death, and that might prolong that little bit of a little while. So it's quite unusual to have two doctors attend at home, and they can't be from the same practice, I believe. They quite often know each other, because I suppose it's quite a small world of doctors, but you wouldn't have Smith and Jones from the same practice attending. And again, that's due to the likes of Harold Shipman, who obviously you know, was up to no good and was hastening his patients. Hastening was the word I was trying to find earlier on and was failing dismally. That's the reason why, so that it's somebody unconnected. I mean, obviously they could, in theory, still be in cahoots, but it is unlikely. So the second doctor usually attends at the undertakers, and normally you need to sign the medical paperwork. Again, in times of COVID, it is slightly difficult. So that's what happens if somebody passes away at home. Correct me if I'm wrong, Carm, or if it was any different for lovely Ellen. Please let me know. So if the coroners become involved, what they say takes precedent over the doctors and the police and the ambulance. So if someone says, oh no, I think they've just, you know, they've had this or that, the coroners have further jurisdiction. So they will have more say than the doctors, and they will take over and arrange the certification. Carmel saying there were no doctors available, so I had to wait for special paramedic for 5 hours. Is that for a special paramedic that is qualified to certify death? Right, okay. Then had to wait 6 days for GP to do the paper. Yeah, it is. I know Mum and Dad had to wait, I think it was 3 or 4 days when Uncle Jim passed away in hospital to go back and get the paperwork. Thank you for that, Carmel. I hope you don't mind. Well, I know you don't mind because we talk about it. I know you don't mind sharing about your lovely mum. 5 hours, yeah, I thought so, Carmel. So that's what happens there. Now, the coroners, the doctors, if need be, as Carmel said, you would get a qualified paramedic. And I know, for example, in our doctor's surgery, some of the paramedics are trained up and they see you for a doctor's appointment if it's something that they feel they can deal with. So, you know, there are these people, and I'm guessing that's one of these qualified special paramedics that you're talking about. So if the coroners become involved, that obviously does make things drag on, for want of a better word. So people are automatically referred to a coroner for, there's about 8 reasons. So these are, oh, he was lovely and made the calls, etc. The funeral director, and that's what you need, isn't it? You need somebody who knows what they're doing, because you're in a state of shock, grief, horror, disbelief, all those things. And if somebody can go, I can do this, that's really helpful. So all deaths of children and young people under the age of 18, even if it's due to natural causes, and that's for a safeguarding purpose. Oh, I didn't know this one. Deaths within 24 hours of admission to hospital. Deaths that may be linked to medical treatment, surgery or anaesthetic. So, you know, and I suppose again this is safeguarding, isn't it? This is to make sure that, you know, if there is an issue, that it's looked at properly. It's not just signed off and gone. Deaths that may be due to an accident, however long ago it was, deaths due to or may be linked to drugs or medications, whether prescribed or illicit. And obviously if there's a possibility the person took their own life, they're always referred to coroner. The most obvious one, any suspicious circumstances or history of violence. Another interesting one is deaths linked to the person's occupation. For example, if they've been exposed to asbestos. So I suppose if chemicals, yeah, that's an interesting one, isn't it? All deaths of people who are in custody or detained under the Mental Health Act, even if it's due to natural causes. So again, that's it's reassuring that these things, when it's these circumstances, it's looked at a little bit more closely. I mean, it doesn't help the family. Health and safety, yeah, and Carmel is a first aider, so I guess you know this, Carmel. She's a first aider trainer, aren't you? So yeah, you must know more about this than me, Carmel. You should come on and talk about this. And some unusual illnesses, including tuberculosis and hepatitis. I'm wondering if that is any reportable illnesses that you would have to declare under RIDDOR, which is the reporting of incidents, dangerous occurrences, of death or dangerous occurrences. I can't remember the exact words, but that's roughly what RIDDOR is. Take a sip of tea. Excuse me, I'm a bit coldy and I think I'm going to start croaking before the day is out. So if I get a bit coffee and croaky, yes. So so it's going to be infectious diseases, Carmel, I would imagine. So, so this will result in a post-mortem or autopsy, which is the same thing. And obviously that's not a pleasant thought, but it is where they do an operation basically after death to make sure that they can ascertain the cause of death. The coroners will then release the paperwork and release the body for the family for either cremation or burial. Once it's released, once it's done and the body's released, you can get on with, you know, getting that person laid to rest. So even if the coroners think there's foul play, well, if they're not, if it's been a suspicious cause, they can release it. If they're really concerned about foul play and it's still being investigated, they do have the power, quite obviously, to keep the body. And in this case, they will open and adjourn an inquest, usually on the same day. So if they want to keep somebody for further investigation, supposing, I mean, there's lots of high profile things in the media at the moment, but where there's a chance of basically getting DNA of the perpetrator, they may hold on a little bit longer to the body. I mean, there are stories of people being, you know, kept by the coroners for six months. I mean, that's very, very rare. Usually once they've ascertained what it is, even if the the coroner's report is yet to come, oh gosh, what's it called, the investigation, oh my brain's gone, and I walk past the coroner's office every time I go into the registry office to do weddings. Anyway, inquest, that's the thing. Having a bit of a brain fuzz day. Back to work yesterday after being off for a month, and it's done some brain cells in, bless me. So that is rare, and usually the inquest is after. You can bury somebody before the inquest. It's very rare that you don't. So moving on a little bit further on our oh, thanks Carmel, reporting of injuries, disease, dangerous occurrence regulations. Yeah, that's RIDDOR. That's the things that need to be reported to the Health and Safety Executive. Okay, so if you have a road traffic collision or an accident at work, the police will call the coroners. Oh, good morning, Raf. Hope I am feeling better and all is good. Raf, you have to join in here if you need me, because Raf is a funeral director. So if I've got this wrong, we can blame Jane. No, bless her. But correct me if I'm wrong anywhere, Raf, won't you? Thank you for popping by. So the coroners do have an undertaker or funeral director, working under contract to them for this purpose. So you wouldn't have to worry if somebody was in an accident at work and were killed outright, or as an RTC, the coroners will automatically, once they've been informed, they will send somebody. Oh, doing well so far, thank you. Thank you. So at the undertakers, and I have to say, the people I've worked with treat your loved ones with the greatest of respect, and they are, anywhere I've ever been in, they are spoken about with respect, treated with love, and I think generally treated the way they would like their loved ones treated. So if that reassures you, because that might be a worry for me, you know, I know people worry that carers come and do their job, though all the carers I know are fantastic. They worry that nurses come and do their job, but again, all the nurses that I've dealt with recently, and it's been a fair few, have been awesome. So I think, sorry, there's a riotous cat. I think 99% of the people in this care sector, whether it's health, well-being, or the last few things you can do for somebody, do it because they want to do it. So at the undertakers, your loved one's kept in a temperature controlled environment, and then the second doctor can come and sign there if necessary. The first one will, like Carmel was saying. Now here there might be a disagreement, and that's a professional difference of opinion. So maybe, like I said, Dr. Smith comes along and goes, oh yes, heart attack, and then Dr. Jones says, well, I'm not sure, you know, I'm not sure, there's something here that doesn't fit. They will perhaps go back and re-examine and look at the medical history, and if they can't decide, or if they can't decide that both things could be contributing, and again, if they think, actually, I think there is some foul play here, they'd call the coroner, and the coroner would come in. So bodies aren't automatically embalmed, and that certainly doesn't happen until the stage of the medical certificate of a cause of death has been completed, for obvious reasons, because you'd effectively be tampering with the body should there be a suspicious, suspicions of foul play. So when that's all sorted out, once your loved one is, all the paperwork's done, then they're looked after by the staff at the funeral directors. So that'll be washing and brushing their hair, setting the hair if they have it done in a particular way. A facial, which I think is such a beautiful thing, and there's medical and practical reasons for that, but it also means that that person is treated lovingly. They're washed and dressed and put in their own clothes, or the clothes, if you want. Some people go and buy an outfit for this, other people put them in their favourite clothes, whatever that person wants. Even going as far as painting their nails, and I know some people have their makeup done as per family choice. If you've got somebody who is always extremely glamorous and liked everything done, then again, that's fine, that's perfect for the individual. So that's all the professionals are doing their work and getting your loved one ready for their final journey. So what do you have to do? Well, the next thing for the individual is to register the death. Now, this obviously is a sad time, and it is difficult. I've gone and registered. I went and registered my father-in-law's death with my husband and my brother-in-law and his friend. So this needs to be done in the district that the person passed away in, which for us was local. That's fine. This obviously is going to be a little bit more difficult if they're further away. It also should be done within 5 days. So under normal circumstances, you phone and make an appointment. Now, this is done through the local authority. Now, here in Kent, which is where I am, obviously, most of you who watch these know me and know this anyway. That's done through the libraries. I'm not sure it's done through the libraries in every other district, but on your county council website will be the information for this. And I have to say, the KCC information is very good. I did look it up, and all the information's there, and it's quite user friendly. So at the moment, when my father-in-law died, I phoned up. My brother-in-law phoned me, because my husband was away, and within an hour of him phoning me, I phoned up the local authority and made an appointment to, that was a Friday, and I made an appointment to register his death on the Tuesday, because you have to, that's what you've got to do. So currently this is done online. Now obviously I haven't had to experience this, so I don't quite know how this works. Raf, Carmel, jump in here if I get this wrong. So as opposed to person, because of COVID. So this is traditionally where the death certificate is given to the family, and my understanding is at the moment that will be sent to you, and there is paperwork that gives permission for cremation or burial, and that's known as the green paperwork in the funeral directors and the undertakers. That's what they know. So if they mention the greens, that's what they're talking about. That, I believe, is currently being emailed direct to the funeral director, and that is the thing that the funeral director has to have, that to go ahead. If they haven't got that, and Raf and I know well about this, that's your law. Once you've got that, you can go ahead. If you haven't got that, you can't go ahead. It's as simple as that. So that will then in its turn go to the crematorium or the cemetery. Whoever's responsible there will deal with that, and that will finally go back to the local authority to finalise the details of where this person has been laid to rest or has been cremated. So that's that bit. So now once the deceased has been washed and dressed, and or the family can now go and see them in the chapel of rest if you want to, and it's not for everybody. I know I was talking to my mum on Mother's Day actually, and she was telling me that, and she said before that she'd seen her dad, all correct, thank you Raf, Carmel, saying we had to collect the paper from the GPs because the doctor took it to the last minute. Oh, okay. So I mean, I'm guessing we're in really difficult times, Carmel, and especially if he took so long to do it. But yeah, but Mum was saying she didn't see my granddad the day he died, but she went back to see, she did, sorry, I beg your pardon, she had to go and identify him in the hospital. Now, she said that was okay because he was lying in his bed. This is just her view, but she went back to see him in the chapel of rest, and she found that more difficult because he'd been moved. He seemed natural in his bed in hospital, she said. And I think when somebody is still asleep, it's probably easier on your psyche than seeing them. But I know the staff make it as easy for you as they can. It's never going to be easy, but they will make it the best they can for you. So you can then start to make your arrangements with the undertakers or the funeral directors, and they will sit with you and go through what it is that is planned. If it's planned, this is when having things planned is a marvellous idea, or what you want, and if you don't know, this is a chance for them to chat through with you. They're not going to force anything on you, well, you've got to do this. They'll explain all your options to you, and they will contact the cemetery or the crematorium to make an appointment for that funeral. It's usually a couple of weeks. It has been longer. I know at one stage I spoke to a funeral director, when was this, it was about halfway through January, and they were struggling to get anything for a month. I think there'd been obviously an awful lot of deaths, unfortunately. So that the undertakers will sort that out. While you're there, they'll say, okay, we've got Wednesday the 17th or at 10:30. They'll sort that out. It's not a call you have to make, though you can, if you want to, you can do it yourself, and I'll come to that in a little bit. So you can choose, if you have a vicar, if you've got a faith, you'll want a vicar or a minister or a priest, whoever it is that is important for you, and you can choose your celebrant. Now you can choose whoever you want. If you don't know them, the undertaker will recommend one. If you say, well, I'm not religious, but I know Dad would have liked a vicar, then they'll know somebody, they can find somebody to perform a religious service. Now, I'm not religious at all. I've got a completely different faith, but I'm more than happy personally to include God and the church in mine. I got happily, like for example, yesterday we went through the Lord's Prayer and we had a religious committal because that's what that person wanted. It's not about me. But if you were really religious, I'm guessing you're going to want a person of faith to do that for you. The undertaker will recommend one, and then they will contact the celebrant to make sure that they can do that day. And then the celebrant, what I always do is I always make contact with the family myself. I'll get their number and then I will phone them maybe later that day and say hello, introduce myself, and then make arrangements to chat with them. Currently we're doing this chat via Zoom or by phone because of COVID. Normal circumstances, I would come round to your house and sit with you, chat to you, hear all your stories of your loved one, find out all the details about their life and how we're going to do this, and talk through all the options you've got to, whether you want poems, whether you want hymns, music, all those things. And we can still do that. We'll do that over Zoom. And I've done funerals over Zoom. I haven't done a funeral over Zoom. The family chat over Zoom or a phone call. So you still, even in this COVID situation, you get all of that. And I know I'm not on my own in doing that. Everybody does that. So for your funeral itself, what choices have you got? So you've got the traditional one, the burial at a cemetery or in a graveyard. You've got the cremation of ashes, which you can have scattered, or you can have them buried in a family plot, which is what we've done. Now that's called interring of the ashes. Now more it's come up quite a lot lately. I've seen some adverts on the telly for a direct cremation, and that is where the body goes to the crematorium, and obviously they look after your loved one on their last journey. And that's that. You don't have a funeral. You don't go there for a service. You don't go there for a celebration of life. Whether you then choose to have a memorial or a celebration later on, a private one, whether you choose to gather in a field and have a big party, it's down to you. Whether you all go down the pub, that's down to you. And for that, you would contact the crematorium. Raf, maybe you can correct me on this. Would you, because obviously your loved one needs to be needs to rest somebody there until that comes. So I'm guessing that there would still be an undertaker involved, but you don't have to have the big funeral. So obviously that would be something you would have to ask about, because that's quite a new phenomena. So, and the last option you could have, which is something that I found really interesting, is a natural burial. So it's still a burial, but it doesn't have to be in a cemetery or in a churchyard. Now there are places, they're obviously licensed. You can't just dig a hole wherever you fancy. You can't go up the North Downs and think, Mum, I'd like it here, and dig your hole. Natural burial, and there are quite a few sites, and I won't go into lots and lots of detail because I've got a lovely lady called Sian who is going to come and talk to us about that, hopefully in a few weeks' time. I know she's been very, very busy, but one of the local natural burial places I went to, and I was lucky enough to be there, fortunate enough to be there when an actual ceremony was taking place. And it's a beautiful idea. It's not consecrated ground as in religious, but it is ground that has been sanctioned and approved for burial. There's various recommendations. It can't be near water. It can't be. There's various things it can't be. It can't be. What's the other things it can't be? It can't be near water, and obviously you still have the same. You have to dig so far down and all those. So, but that's nothing. But Sian is going to come and talk to us at a later date. So just a bit of information about cremations, a bit of a backdrop. The first cremation in England was in Woking Crematorium. This was a new crematorium built for this, because it wasn't legal till 1884. So the first crematorium cremation in England was in 1885, and that was a Mrs. Jeanette Pickersgill. So cremations are the subject to the Cremation Act of 1902, and obviously the way they're done and the way they're held, you've got to comply with certain regulations. Technically, funeral pyres were outlawed in 1930. So, because my brother-in-law, morning Danielle, my brother-in-law always says he wants to have a funeral pyre in the woods. Now, you can't do that. I'm not advocating that for one jot. You can't do that. But technically, since 2010, they are legal under certain circumstances. What I would say is it needs to be in a contained structure, and you have to comply with so many planning and environmental regulations, obviously, that it's nigh on impossible. It was, I'm pretty sure they had to allow it because in some religions, the funeral pyre is the traditional way of the last rites of somebody, but it is, oh, work calling, you're doing it. Oh, thanks, Raf. So it is very, very difficult to be able to do that. So don't, whatever you do, think, oh, I can go out and do that. You would have to have it in a contained building. You have to make sure the level of the smoke being emitted is of a safe level, that it's disposed of, it's at the right temperature, all those things. It's nigh on impossible. So burials are subject to the Burial Act of 1857. So this stipulates how and where bodies can be buried, how deep, where. So up till now it's been sanctified ground or allotted ground. Now this deals with, it makes exhumation possible in certain circumstances. So when I said about exhumation earlier on, obviously if there's concerns about foul play, or maybe if people think there's been a serious illness, like a plague thing, that can come into it as well. It also makes it illegal to disturb the grave without a certified legal cause. Now this has, so 1857 this came in, and this is no doubt because in the late 1820s there was a huge surge of body snatchers prior to this. Famous ones being Burke and Hare in Edinburgh, who, I think it was around St Andrews, not St Andrews, it was the medical school in Edinburgh. It was around there, and they were getting bodies for Dr. Robert Knox. So obviously we don't want that. So that's where that bit's come from. So the safe and controlled disposal of the deceased is the only legal requirement. So that's either burial or cremation. That's the only legal bit. That's the bit that you have to comply with. Other than that, whether you have a funeral or a celebration or neither, is entirely up to the individual, entirely up to the family. So you can have your straight to cremation and do nothing. If your person said, you know, for example, if you said, don't waste your money, pay for me to be, you know, sent on my way in a safe and healthy, in a hygienic way, that's fine. You can do that. That's absolutely not a problem. If you want to have people together, obviously COVID dependent, I'll come to that in a minute, that again is completely up to the individual what you do. There is no legal requirement, and you don't have to have a vicar, you don't have to have a celebrant. If you've got somebody that, I'm doing myself out of work here, if you say, actually we're not going to have that, we're going to have someone to you know, we're going to do a direct cremation, and then we're just going to go and hire, this is in non-COVID times obviously, we're going to go and hire this hotel room, and we're all going to sit around and tell stories about how much we love someone. That's fine, you can do that. You don't have to have the funeral, you don't have to have a vicar, you don't have to have a celebrant. So what difference is COVID making? Well, at the moment, currently for a funeral, it's a maximum of 30 people inside or outside. So, but that doesn't include the people working. So for example, the funeral I did yesterday, the chapel had, it must have had 30 guests in, because there were guests waiting outside, mourners waiting outside as well. So it doesn't include the crematorium or cemetery staff. It doesn't include the funeral director and the pallbearers. So yesterday that was, excuse me, sorry. I was dreading that happening yesterday during the funeral I was doing. So, for example, yesterday at the crematorium, I saw 3 staff. The funeral director and the pallbearers were another 7, so that's 10. Celebrant or vicar, that's myself, 11. I did enjoy parking in the minister's parking yesterday. I hadn't noticed that before, so I parked in there. And one of the mourners was a carer for the lady who'd passed away, and she knew me. She went, "What are you doing parking in there?" And I was like, "Well, I'm the minister for today." Well, celebrant. So there were another 11 people. So you think that's 41 people. So this also applies to the church, dependent on size. It applies to the crematorium or the cemetery. Of course, it's a lot easier to spread out in a cemetery. So if people were looking at a grave that was 30 feet away, who's to say that they're there? That's not the right answer. But it's very difficult to judge, and people will be in the crematorium, the cemetery, putting flowers down for loved ones. So as a rough guide for those of you that are local, that's about, in the crematoriums we've got, so Maidstone has got a capacity of, I think I'm feeling it's 90, so it's about a third of capacity there. And Medway crematoriums, they're both, I'm sure they're both over 100. I've got a figure about 120, 130 in my head. So they will, so they're down to about a quarter of their capacity, but that's what it is. That's the law for the moment. Hopefully that will soon change and people will be able to gather in bigger groups to say goodbye to people, because that must have been really tough if you've got a big family and all your family and friends can't get there. So for commemorative events such as stone setting or ashes, scattering of the ashes, that's currently limited to 6 people plus staff. So that's a harder one. I haven't been involved in that, so yeah, so that must be tough, 6 people. But I'm guessing that is just the, that's not the huge big thing, is it? You don't have the whole family and all the friends there. A few little differences COVID are making. You still need to socially distance and wear your masks. In the crematorium, you're unable to sing, which is sad. I mean, we had the Lord's Prayer yesterday, so people were talking, but obviously they've got their masks on. And if you're at a graveyard service, you're not currently able to, the tradition of throwing earth onto the coffin, you're not able to do that because of the trowel and the hands passing it. So that's what COVID has meant for now. There's obviously other things. I mean, it was really difficult yesterday not to hug people who clearly needed the hug. That would be my natural instinct, is to put an arm around someone and go and chat, and that's really difficult. I find that's one of the most difficult things for me at the moment. What has come up and what people have spoken about is possibility of memorial events for people who've died during COVID. And I'm going to be looking into this in more detail in April, because obviously if you've had to have, for example, my husband's uncle passed away during COVID, and he had to have a very small funeral, and he's got a really big family, and everybody would have loved to have gone somewhere and had a drink and had a bit of a reception and done the telling the stories and getting together, and that's part of your mourning, that's part of your grief. So that is important. So I will be looking at that later on in the year. I think that's booked for April. So one of those, my friend Mel, she organised a memorial event for her husband Mike. This was before COVID, but she organised an event for him. So she's going to talk about that, which is going to be really personal. And what she did, and that was pre-COVID. And also I've got a lovely lady called River coming now. She's the celebrant who I did my training with, and she's going to talk about memorial rituals here and around the world, and that's a fascinating subject. So they're both going to be really interesting. So I won't go into that anymore. Oh, I'll save all my thoughts for them, which is really difficult. So for my personal experiences of services, so most cemeteries have got a small chapel for their services. These are usually quite small. The Maidstone one there's two in Maidstone, and there's a tiny one and a slightly bigger one, but neither of them are big. So because of COVID, these are pretty much out of action. So the funerals I've done in the cemetery have been direct graveside funerals, which it's my very first one I did. Very first one was a graveside one. And whilst there's advantages and disadvantages in both. I mean, it's beautiful to be outside. It was a lovely day. It was a warm day when I did the first one, and you could hear the birds song, and you're in a beautiful, peaceful setting. And I personally think graveyards, churchyards, cemeteries are peaceful and beautiful. Some people might find them eerie. I don't. I think that says a lot about my chosen career. There's a sense of laying people to rest very much there, especially if you're lowering the person into a family grave. Or there's some people who are going to be able to come back and see the person. And of course there's no time constraint, if you can stand there as long as you like. The service could be an hour if need be. That's up to you if you wanted to do all sorts of things, but obviously it's weather dependent. And I think they could be quite difficult. If I'm being honest, the sound of the soil on the coffin, I think it's a very difficult sound to hear. That's a personal choice. It's what people do, and you don't have to do that. They can be a little bit stark, but if that's what people want, if that's their tradition, their family tradition, their cultural tradition, faith tradition, I'm not judging. It's what everybody wants. And obviously there you'd need to supply your own music if you want music for a graveside ceremony. But of course that's all doable. And we had the one I did there, Mason Cemetery, there was some wonderful music. And again, people were really spread out, and that was really good. The majority of my work's been cremations, and they're inside. So I'm usually in the chapel for this, and I'm there to greet you. I'm waiting at the lectern, so I'll be standing there waiting to greet your deceased as they come in with a graveside burial. I wait with the mourners till the body. Sorry, I keep saying the body, till the deceased turns up with the funeral directors, and that's a little bit more intimate in some ways than me being separate for me. Again, that's just personally my opinion. So the pallbearers will bring the deceased in their coffin, and they place them on the big wooden plinth you've got. It's called the catafalque, and that's the main focus of the chapel. And you can have your curtains open or your curtains closed. Generally, I keep the curtains open, or if people ask me what they want, the curtains are usually open until you do the committal, which is where you sort of do your final bits. And that's up to the individual. Some people like them open, some people like them closed. I mean, my father-in-law's funeral, the funeral directors gave us little wooden hearts, and we went on tiny little things about this big. I know I've got them. I think I moved my handbag. Tiny little wooden hearts, literally this big, and we placed them on the coffin. And I thought this was slightly strange. We had two, one to place on the coffin, the other one we rubbed on the coffin, and then he told us to take them home and put them in our purses or wallets or somewhere safe. So I've got a little wooden heart in my purse that was rubbed against my father-in-law's coffin, which I did because that's what we did, but wasn't sure about that. But some people like to go and touch the coffin on their way out, blow them a kiss, and it's a difficult time, and whatever you choose to do is exactly the right thing for you and your family. So in a chapel, in a crematorium chapel, the music is supplied by a special system. I mean, it's pretty much everywhere, the Wesley system. So it's a computerized system, and you choose your music, and the undertakers and myself will verify that with the chapel. Like, for example, yesterday when I went in, the crematorium assistant said, right, can I just double check the music with you? So I told him the music I knew, and then when the undertaker, the funeral director, came in, they just said, just checking the music's the same. So it's just making sure that we've got it right. So you don't need to supply your own CDs or supply music. I suppose if you'd got music that the person had written or was written for them, so not mainstream music, not commercial or released music, you may have to supply that, and I think that there would be a small charge there, but otherwise it's included. So the local chapel also has a live stream or webcasting system. My local one has got uses a system called Obitus, and you can webcast the funeral. This is obviously, sorry, I've got a cat invasion going on. This is obviously at the moment very, very popular because you can't have everybody in that might want to come. And if you've got family in, I don't know, New Zealand that can't get there, I mean, don't want to set up a Zoom, do you? People I know that in weddings actually, which was marvellous. That's a whole other story. But this webcasts it, so you get a code and you tap in your little pin, and you can watch it live, or you can usually watch it for about a week afterwards, and that's nice. I mean, I've stood outside a chapel at a funeral, well distanced, and watching on my phone. It's that simple to do, and there is a charge for that, but I believe it's about £60–70. It's not hundreds and hundreds, and in the general scheme of a funeral, £60–70 isn't a lot of money. So that can be viewed all the way around the world. So that is lovely. People have often asked me, how can I be sure that I'm getting my loved one's ashes, and is it them? So when I went to look, when I was doing my training, I had to find out a bit about local facilities, and it sounds slightly crazy, but I phoned the crematorium and then said, oh, I'm training, I'm new to this, would I be able to come and see? And she said, yes, of course, we usually get celebrants come and see, especially if they haven't done one here before, where you stand, where you can put your bags, that kind of thing. Where the little room is. There's a little vestry that we use, and I said to her, I've been to funerals there, but obviously I've never stood at the front and done it. So I wanted to, for my mind's sake, so that I was prepared to give it my very best, to stand at the lectern and look at it from that point of view. So I was prepared. Now, sorry, I'm having trouble with my computer here. There we go. So when I was there, she said to me, a lovely lady called Lindsay at Maidstone, she said, would you like to see out the back? And I said, well, yes, please. So she showed me out the back too, and I saw all of it. And I can assure you that you don't get 3 coffins in one furnace. You get one coffin, and they tap in a name and they tap in a code, and it has to match to the next bit, and it's all computerized, and you can't put Mrs. Jones in the slot that's then for Mr. Smith. It's got a name comes up, it's got a number comes up, it's computerized, so it follows itself through. The computerized system follows itself through, and the temperature is about 1400 to 1600 degrees, so everything does pretty much get incinerated. And it was quite reassuring to see, actually. So yeah, so that's about cremation, and again, that's done with dignity and respect. And there was it was in use when I went back to see, and obviously we weren't running around screaming and shouting. It was all done very dignified, and there are some things you're not supposed to put in coffins for incineration, and that's things like glass and tin, because they will melt but they won't disintegrate, and then they have to be scraped off of the furnace, which obviously is time consuming. So I think that's about it for cremations, really. So like I said, Sian's going to talk to us about natural burials. And of course you can actually be buried on your own land. You'd obviously need to get permission for that, but you can actually be buried where you want to be buried if you own the land. But of course you need to declare that on the deeds of your property, and you might find you have a bit of trouble selling it. So let's see what Carmel's were. At my brother's funeral, his mates put their Chelsea scarves in. I don't think there was much room for all that. About 500 people came. Yeah. Oh, well, that's beautiful. And that's when you can personalise things, isn't it? And I think that's what makes it, that's what's so hard right now. And I think there will probably be a big wave of memorials later this year, next year, when people can get together and celebrate their loved one the way their loved one would really want to have their life celebrated. So anyway, that's me for today. Thank you for joining me. I'm glad I got the technical bits right. It's good to know that Raf was here, and I've worked with Raf on several occasions, and he's great. And obviously, Carmel, your experience with your mum, thanks for sharing that with us. I know that's still really, really raw, but it's good to have you there. So that's a little bit about you know, what actually happens. And then I shall be having a lady come to talk to us, another celebrant, and we're going to talk about what we do. So yeah, so I'm glad you enjoyed it, Carmel. So yeah, so that's me for this week, and I will be back next week with a guest. I'm not sure who it is. I haven't got my notes to hand, which is really unorganised. But yeah, so thanks for listening, and take care. I'll see you soon. Bye.